Welcome to the channel where history comes alive with simple English. Today's episode is dedicated to the brilliant and timeless man that is Aristotle. Every aspect of science, logic, politics, and ethics was given a framework by a single philosopher. From a curious boy in ancient Macedonia to the tutor of Alexander the Great, and finally to the found of one of the most important schools in Athens, Aristotle's journey remains steeped in passion, knowledge, and everlasting influence. Whether you are looking to better your English or want to learn about the world's greatest minds, you are in the right place. Therefore, sit back, relax, and go with me as we explore the mighty tale of a man whose thoughts still work for us today. Aristotle, in the ancient town of Stagira, in northern Greece, in the year 384 BCE, there was born a child who would forever sculpt what we know as Western thought, Aristotle. Aristotle was the son of Nicomachus, a personal physician to King Amyntas III of Macedon, a post that brought the family into contact with the Macedonian royal court. This proximity to nobility would later border on determining the fate of Aristotle's life and career. Since infancy, Aristotle learned scientific matters, primarily those concerning biology or medicine. Nicomachus was not just an ordinary healer. Rather, he was a man skilled in science, with observation, experimentation, and reasoning as his tools. These influences would make a lasting imprint on Aristotle's intellectual orientation. Aristotle's childhood, however, despite its auspicious beginnings, ran an uphill course. He was orphaned at an early age, and thereafter placed under the tutelage of an individual named Proxenus. Recognizing the brightness in the child, Proxenus ensured that Aristotle gained adequate training. Little is known in detail about these years, but Aristotle probably learned grammar, poetry, rhetoric, and maybe even some early dialectics. By his 17th year, Aristotle moved out from his native country and went towards Athens, the intellectual capital in the Greek world. He entered Plato's academy, then the highest institute of learning. The 20 years he spent there had Aristotle mainly as a student in his early days, then as a teacher in his later time. Aristotle quickly established a reputation as one of the most brilliant of Plato's students. Yet, his approach to philosophy diverged from that of his teacher. The latter posited transcendent ideals, abstract, flawless templates of existence beyond the mundane worlds. By contrast, Aristotle was much more terrestrial. He averred that knowledge must hence be derived from the observation, logical deduction, and analysis of the material world. This difference in levels was both fundamental and irreconcilable, eventually serving as the starting point upon which Aristotle built his own philosophical conception, at variance with that of Platonic thought. Despite all such differences, Plato admired the sheer intellect of Aristotle. Certain rumors even go far enough to say that Plato called Aristotle the mind of the school. Aristotle's experience at the academy was intensely formative, allowing him to roam far and wide in thought, metaphysics, ethics, politics, logic, and natural science. Upon Plato's death in 347 BCE, Aristotle hoped to be appointed head of the academy, but for whatever reason, his views were deemed too divergent, and he was rejected, perhaps due to his Macedonian origins. Thus ended the period of Aristotle's life in Athens, and began another chapter altogether. Aristotle left Athens in 347 BCE and traveled to Asia Minor, where he found welcoming patronage under Hermias, ruler in the city of Assos. In Assos, Aristotle continued biological research and philosophical inquiry. After Hermias was overthrown and executed by the Persians, Aristotle wended his way to Lesbos, again joining forces with yet another great thinker, Theophrastus. Together they carried on their investigations into zoology and marine biology. It was here that Aristotle's urge to classify and understand the natural world grew ever stronger, preparing him for the great scientific works. Though far from Athens, here Aristotle set the stage for the next development phase in his life, a phase that would catapult him into the orbit of power and change his life forever. In 343 BCE, Aristotle received this invitation that would forever change his destiny. King Philip II of Macedon wished for Aristotle to tutor his then 13-year-old son, called Alexander, by the world. Philip's decision was entirely deliberate. Aristotle was a Macedonian himself and had studied under Plato. Perhaps Philip envisaged that giving his son a philosophical education would help him become a wise and just leader. For Aristotle, there was a peculiar chance, raising the brain of a king-to-be, and hence justifiably tampering with the flow of history. Aristotle returned to his native land and began teaching Alexander in a private school just outside Pella, which was the capital of Macedon. The tutoring lasted several years and involved a full course of rhetoric, literature, science, philosophy, and ethics. Legend has it that Aristotle even gave Alexander a special copy of the Iliad, annotated with his own comments. Their relationship was complicated. Aristotle wanted moderation through reason, while Alexander, a military genius, was ever more attracted to conquest and glory. Yet the foundation Aristotle laid must have permanently influenced him. Alexander would carry with him the Iliad and a great respect for Greek civilization, science, and philosophy all over Asia. Meanwhile, Aristotle advised Philip, assisting him in his interests in Macedonian politics. While Aristotle was still principally a philosopher, his involvement at court marked one of the few occasions in human history that intellectuals may have directly influenced power. Alexander ascended the throne after Philip had been assassinated in 335 BCE. Now, at the height of his influence, Aristotle returned to Athens. Howbeit, he did not return to Plato's academy, but started his school called the Lyceum. The Lyceum was more or less an abductory center. With Aristotle taking the lead, it was more of systematic and investigative. Cataloging, observing, dissecting, and analyzing everything about life and nature was considered to be by far the best way. This school had probably one of the earliest libraries, and research was wide-ranging, beginning in astronomy and going as far as zoology. The academy emphasized more theoretical side of philosophy, whereas the Lyceum stressed on practical knowledge and logic. Students of the Lyceum were usually called peripatetics, or those who walk around, because Aristotle preferred to walk and teach in the covered colonnades of the school garden. The Lyceum's influence was enormous. For over a decade, Aristotle and his students collected data, documented natural phenomena, studied political systems, and debated ethics. This was where he wrote most of his greatest works. It proved to be a highly productive time for Aristotle, who seemingly could not get enough knowledge. Almost all fields of knowledge known to the ancient world, were addressed by his writings and teachings. Logic. He invented formal logic, including syllogism, the basis of deductive reasoning. Biology. He dissected animals and classified species. He theorized about life processes, founding modern biology. Ethics. In Nicomachean Ethics, he introduced the idea that virtue is a habitual disposition formed by reason and to the mean politics. In politics, he studied the various types of governments and concluded that the best government is the one that fosters a good life. Metaphysics. He studied various ways to exist, cause, and what it means to be. Rhetoric and poetics. He analyzed the functioning of language, arts, and drama in directing human behavior. The things that make Aristotle's works so important are far more than their pure coverage. They describe a method. He demanded observation, classification, and logical deduction, principles that influenced scientific and philosophical thought for centuries. Most of them remain lost, however. Dozens of treatises survive that form the backbone of Western intellectual history. Philosophy in Aristotle's hands was more than abstract speculation. It became a way to understand the real world. Though wonderful times, Aristotle's period in Athens was no sinecure. The political situation in Greece was becoming hostile. Alexander the Great was now in the throes of conquest and was both resented and admired in Athens. Therefore, anti-Macedonian feelings were building up. Aristotle, being a Macedonian tutor, was walking a tight rope. He kept to himself, maintaining a doubtful neutrality throughout. But ultimately, these controversies over his connections with both Alexander and Macedon would lead to increased scrutiny. Anyway, this was Aristotle's golden time. In about 12 years, Aristotle turned the Lyceum into an intellectual powerhouse. In that time, he produced some of the greatest literature in history and trained a whole generation of new thinkers. Alas, dark skies were turning upon him. Alexander found himself marked for glory all over the ancient world, and his celebrated death in Babylon was certainly a tragic event at the mere age of 32. His death created a massive political vacuum, under whose shadow cities and factions rose in revolt against Macedonian dominance all over Greece. One of such cities was Athens. The mood in Athens changed suddenly. Anti-Macedonian rhetoric flourished, and anyone associated with the Macedonian Empire, be it politician, general, or philosopher, would fall under suspicion. Aristotle. The philosopher was one of those targets. His association with Alexander, his Macedonian origin, and indeed his very philosophy, rendered him vulnerable. Some Athenians leveled accusations of impiety against him, an infamous charge leveled almost exactly a century before against Socrates that had condemned him to death. But Aristotle was unwilling to die a martyr for philosophy, unlike Socrates. He is said to have asserted, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." Henceforth he left Athens and sojourned in Chalcis, in Euboea, where his mother's family had roots. Exile notwithstanding, Aristotle did not abandon philosophy. He had remained engaged with correspondence, and of course, he kept on writing and reflecting on his life work. His health and energy began to wane after the move to Chalcis. He had weathered decades of rigorous study, teaching, politics, and combined with exile. In 322 BCE, barely a year after Alexander died and Aristotle left Athens, He fell ill and died, aged 62. He was buried in Chalcis, and his collected works were left in the care of his students, principally Theophrastus, who succeeded him in the leadership of the Lyceum. Theophrastus continued the scientific and philosophical investigations begun by Aristotle and preserved, propagated, and expounded on his teacher's views. After his death, Aristotle's manuscripts underwent an odd and uncertain period of history. Some were hidden away, even interred, only to be forgotten for centuries. Eventually, they were rescued and compiled by scholars, especially in the Roman and Islamic worlds. His logical treatises, the Organon, were preserved very early and deeply studied during the Islamic Golden Age. They would go on in Europe to become one of the classical medieval and Renaissance texts. Unlike Plato, whose dialogues were wrought with polish and literary flair, Aristotle wrote for a different audience, his students. His writings feel more like lecture notes, thick with ideas, dense at times, repetitive, and hardly stylistic. Yet, in that primitive outline were scattered the germinal ideas of many fields that we still depend on. Aristotle not only helped produce men of knowledge, but systematize it in his categorization of human understanding into chief fields, such as theoretical sciences, physics, mathematics, and metaphysics, practical sciences, ethics and politics, productive sciences, art, rhetoric, and poetics. This classification later became the basis for the structure of university disciplines that would be codified over 1,000 years later. He laid out the method of classification, definition, and analysis used for scientific inquiry and education for the whole of subsequent history. While Plato dreamed of ideal realms, Aristotle gave the tools for coming to know the real one. His work set the stage for leaving myth behind and embracing reason, turning away from speculation and toward investigation. Not all of Aristotle's ideas have stood to prove their worth. His view of the cosmos, in which the earth was at the center, was soon shown to be false by Copernicus and Galileo. His views on women and slavery also reflected the prejudices of his time. Yet even in his mistakes, Aristotle's method of observing, questioning, reasoning, and testing was revolutionary. His work laid the foundation for empirical science, formal logic, and ethical inquiry. By the end of his life, Aristotle had transformed from a curious child in a distant Macedonian town into one of the greatest minds in human history. It goes infinitely far beyond 2,000 years since Aristotle died, and his influence has been so deeply woven into the modern fabric of civilization that we hardly ever think about it. He was not simply a philosopher, rather, he was a system builder of knowledge, a pioneer, a lens through which the world was reimagined. Aristotle walks with us from ethics, biology, politics, to logic, where one can firmly trace his fingerprints during the entire march of human progress. After Aristotle's passing in 322 BCE, his school, the Lyceum, flourished under the stewardship of his student, Theophrastus. The grandeur slowly diminished as political turbulence gripped Athens. An important fact is that the original manuscripts of Aristotle's works that were often private lecture notes, or at any rate, notes compiled by students, were destined for oblivion. Some copies were kept in cellars, while others passed from one scholar to another in silence. Yet, despite this uncertain path, the power of Aristotle's ideas could not remain subdued for an extended period of time. The tides of time, which began after the rise of the Roman Empire, saw the continued popularity of Aristotle's logic and ethics. Famous Roman thinkers such as Cicero considered him with great respect and sought to propagate his teachings within the Latin-speaking world. Indeed, however, the true Renaissance was to take place during the Islamic Golden Age in the 8th to 13th centuries. Aristotle's works were translated into Arabic by Muslim scholars such as Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Averroes ibn Rushd, who also furthered his philosophies. In the Islamic world, Aristotle was termed the first teacher. His logic, ethics, metaphysics, and natural sciences made the cornerstone of Islamic philosophy and education. The deep respect for his rational approach to understanding the universe reverberated with scholars attempting to reconcile faith and reason. These translations would eventually make their way from Spain and Sicily into medieval Europe, triggering yet another revolution. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe made another stab at the renewal of philosophy through Thomas Aquinas and other scholastics. Aquinas, a Dominican friar and theologian, was famous for finally Christianizing Aristotle's philosophy by synthesizing it with Christian doctrine. He maintained that faith and reason were no enemies and appealed to Aristotle's teachings to interpret theological matters, such as the existence of God, ethics, and the meaning of man. This became the dominating view for Europe for centuries. Aquinas was cardinal, so Aristotle would be one of the thinkers admitted to their curriculum in universities, namely Paris, Oxford, and Bologna. His work became the basis of all education in logic, metaphysics, ethics, sciences. In the following centuries, he became the name in the Latin world of the philosopher, because it seemed no more noun would serve for him. By the 16th and 17th centuries, faint fissures began to appear. The rise of modern science found many of Aristotle's views, particularly in physics and astronomy, to be mistaken. For example, he believed heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, disproved by Galileo. He thought the Earth was the center of the universe, rejected by Copernicus and Kepler. He relied too much on theory rather than experiment in some natural sciences. Thus unfolded that of the scientific revolution, when a newer kind of science became dominant, the empirical, mathematical, experimental one, under the lead of Isaac Newton and others. Still, Aristotle's logic remained a framework for inquiry and scientific curiosity. Even when science rejected any of his views, it considered his method of questioning, categorizing, and systematic thinking as a point of departure. Ironically, the very methodology that assisted in his disproof owed him a great debt. Aristotle did not cease to matter. Rather, his thinking has become more integrated with that of the moderns. Here are just a few fields that Aristotle helped define. Biology. He observed and classified more than 500 species, including marine animals, and understood the concept of internal causes. Logic. His system of syllogism was the precursor to modern formal logic and computer algorithm. Ethics. Theories of virtue. Ethics based on him stand major among deontological and utilitarian ethical thinkers today. Political science. The Politics is a major text in political theory, studying various governmental ideas and citizens. Literary theory. His Poetics is the earliest known treatise on dramatic and narrative theory and is foundational to the study of literature. Even psychology owes a great debt to him. Aristotle's concept of the soul as the form of the body provided the starting point for questions about consciousness and identity. Some of Aristotle's words have truly gone immortal. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Happiness depends upon ourselves. His words still echo in classrooms, training seminars, value debates, and beyond. His wisdom is not just history, it is something exceptionally human. So why should we still care about a philosopher of 2,000 years ago in a world obsessed with innovation and the future? Because Aristotle teaches us how to think. He did not ask for blind belief. He questioned. He did not reject experience. He studied it. He did not allow knowledge to be limited to one field. He welcomed all of it. In the era of artificial intelligence, climate change, political divide, and rapid change, we more than ever need tools he offered: observation, reason, balance, and moral inference. His legacy is not that he had all the answers, but that he taught us how to look for them. Aristotle was no mere philosopher. He was a universal thinker, laying down foundations laid across the entire spectrum of human knowledge. His mind encompassed nature and ethics, reason and politics, logic and poetry. A man who refused to give up asking the question, why? Echoes of that voice flow from the courts of Macedon into the halls of modern universities. One wonders, through centuries of opposition and transformation, if Aristotle's teachings still guide us today, reminding us that the pursuit of wisdom is among the most worthy human endeavors. Aristotle died in 322 BCE, but his intellect kept on. Thank you for watching this inspiring journey through the life of Aristotle, the philosopher of reason, virtue, and knowledge. If you liked this video, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so that you never miss a new biography in simple English. Which part of Aristotle's life inspired you most? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. For more stories like this, check out our Greatest Minds in History playlist. Until the next one, keep learning, keep thinking, and remember that wisdom begins in wonder.